The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Today is a joint meeting of the California Transportation Commission, California Air Resources Board, and California Department of Housing and Community Development. I am Chair Hillary Norton of the California Transportation Commission, and it is a pleasure to welcome you on behalf of myself and all of the other participating agencies. First and foremost, I would like to ask Douglas Remedios of our staff to call the roll for the Transportation Commission today.
Good morning, Commissioner Alvarado.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Davis.
Here.
Commissioner Eager. Commissioner Eager. Commissioner Grisby.
Present.
Commissioner Guardino. Commissioner Inman.
Present.
Commissioner Kehoe. Commissioner Liu.
Here.
Commissioner Martinez. Commissioner Tavolani. Chair Norton.
Present. It is now my honor, thank you, to call on Chair Randolph to ask for CARB's clerk to call the roll of the CARB board members.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Norton. Clerk Sakazaki, can you call the roll, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Bombs, Mr. Delatorre, Mr. Eisenhut, Mr. Eisenhut, Supervisor Fletcher,
12 and 17, and then they're now
Senator Flores,
on 91.
Flores here.
And then
Senator Garcia,
one,
Ms. Hurt,
Davina Hurd, present.
Mr. Krakow,
Here.
Dr. Pacheco Werner,
Present.
Mrs. Reardon,
Here.
Supervisor Cerna,
Here.
Professor Sperling,
Here.
Ms. Takvorian,
Here.
Vice Chair Berg, Chair Randolph.
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you.
well, they're all our friends.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, I noticed that Mr. Balms is now on and Commissioner Guardino is trying to get on. He's just having some technical difficulties.
Thank you so much. And I also want to recognize the head of Housing and Community Development, Gustavo Velasquez, for joining us. Thank you for being here. We are going to begin our welcoming remarks, and we will be calling on you after Chair Randolph. So, good morning, fellow commissioners, board members, and HCD leadership. This past year has presented many challenges and hardships for many of us. It's also been an opportunity to learn and grow from not only each other, but from the challenges and obstacles we have faced. I want to recognize CTC staff for thoughtfully developing a racial equity statement that the commission approved in January and vowing to prioritize equity and inclusivity in transportation planning as we move forward together. I'm pleased that we are going to be empaneling our equity roundtable, and we are going to embark on equity listening sessions in partnership with CalSTA and Caltrans. I want to take a moment to welcome CARB Chair Leanne Randolph to participate with us at her first joint meeting, as well as board member Tanya Pacheco Werner and my friend board member Gideon Kratikoff, who were both appointed in December 2020. It was a pleasure to get a chance to talk to CARB Chair Randolph, and I'm looking forward to our joint meeting today and what we'll accomplish together. I would also like to recognize and welcome our newly appointed CTC Commissioner, Commissioner Darnell Grisby, who was appointed to the Commission on March 19th, 2021, and congratulate Commissioner Joe Tavolani for his reappointment to the Commission. Additionally, I want to thank the individuals who have joined us via the web for this important meeting. I'm really looking forward to the presentations we will hear today, and I want to thank the staff at the California Transportation Commission for hosting today's virtual meeting. During the meeting, members of the public will be provided an opportunity to provide comments during each agenda item. It's important that you hear this, as there are two options for participants to provide comments during the public comment period. 1, if you wish to speak, you may click on the hand icon to indicate you wish to speak. You will then be unmuted and called upon to make your comment. 2, if you prefer to provide your comment in writing, you may use the questions tab to type in your comment. Commission staff will read in the comment on your behalf. Please be sure to state your name and affiliation prior to voicing your remarks. Please do your best to be concise with your comments. Also, please make sure that your comments add new information. If you agree with the comments of previous speakers, simply make that statement. Since we often have many speakers, we ask that you make your point in 3 minutes or less. If for some reason we have many speakers on a particular topic, I do reserve the right to limit comments to 1 minute only. I would also like to mention that we will endeavor to take a 30-minute lunch break promptly scheduled for 11:45 to 12:15 today. Before I turn the gavel over to Chair Randolph, I wanted to provide some brief remarks on behalf of the California Transportation Commission. First, the CTC is committed to promoting equity and active sustainable transportation through our work. For example, myself and Executive Director Weiss, alongside Transportation Secretary Kim and Caltrans Director Omashakin, have been meeting with members of California's congressional delegation to discuss prioritizing these areas, such as funding additional transportation, robust funding for transit operators through managed lanes, increased assistance for transition to zero emission buses, and flexibility as we look at moving to zero emission freight. We are excited to partner with the federal government to make our transportation system more efficient, safer, cleaner, and sustainable, and particularly encouraged by the framework of the Build Back Better plan for our nation's infrastructure. We will, in addition, be announcing later in the meeting our work on holding new workshops on the governor's CAPDI plan, and we'll be discussing that when that item comes up after our lunch. Thank you very much, and that concludes my remarks. And now I'm pleased to call on Chair Randolph for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Chair Norton, for that warm welcome, and thanks to the Commission for hosting this meeting this morning. And good morning to everyone here with you. I'm very pleased to be at my first CARB, CTC, and HCD joint meeting. And I also would like to extend my congratulations to newly appointed Commissioner Darnell Grisby, reappointed Commissioner Joe Taglioni, and also our new board members here at CARB. And so I'm looking forward to working with all of you. It's really great to have this forum where our 3 agencies can share knowledge and focus our energy on actions that move us further toward meeting California's goals for climate, air quality, transportation, and housing. I'm really looking forward to our discussions and looking for areas of coordination and collaboration. I find it really encouraging, as Chair Norton mentioned, that all 3 of our agencies have really increased our focus on equity. And I think it's important for us to be clear about why we need to infuse equity into our work. There are many long-standing policies and structures that were built by government agencies based on historically inequitable practices. So when we come together to talk about air pollution, transportation, and housing, I really think it's important that we acknowledge these past and ongoing inequities and have robust, open discussions about the fundamental changes that need to happen to move us forward. We need to move beyond the status quo. So I'm eager to have those discussions and to hear from our stakeholders about how we can advance equity as we transition to a zero-emission future. During my time at the Public Utilities Commission, we established requirements for many programs and investments that are critical for the transition to zero-emission cars and other carbon-free transportation. It's clear to me that this movement away from fossil fuels really requires concerted interagency effort, and these joint meetings are an excellent opportunity to take our collective work to the next level. To achieve these major transformations that are needed to reach our shared goals, we need to think beyond just these 2 meetings that we do twice a year. It's going to take all of us to continuously work together throughout the year. I know our respective staff members have really been increasing their collaboration and strengthening their partnerships between these meetings. And this type of coordination is going to be essential to ensure that we make progress. Today's focus on zero-emission vehicles and sustainable transportation infrastructure is just one example of how we can work together and with other stakeholders to implement Governor Newsom's executive orders. CARB has been working for decades to enact vehicle standards that require zero-emission technologies, and we have many current and upcoming regulations that are designed to meet those targets. They will require sales of all new passenger vehicles and light trucks to be zero emission by 2035. For drayage trucks and off-road vehicles, we want a full transition to zero emission by 2035 where feasible, followed by heavy duty and buses that would make a full transition to zero by 2045. In addition to these regulations, we'll need to work with your agencies and many others to reduce vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. Even after new car sales become fully zero emission, 30% of passenger vehicles will still be gas powered in 2045. So our state's reliance on automobiles also harms our public health, environment, and economy with disproportionate impacts on low-income communities and communities of color. So zero emissions is not enough. We will also need to drive less, and our agencies need to support a broad range of mobility options to make that possible. The Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, or CAPTI, on the agenda today is an important opportunity to better align our investments to support this goal. So I'm really looking forward to that discussion today. And as I mentioned, I'm really excited to see that all three of our agencies have increased the focus on internal diversity and equity, and we've all designated staff to lead those efforts. So I'm eager to build productive relationships going forward and to learn more and understand about your agencies and programs. And so with that, I will pass it back to you, Chair Norton.
Thank you so much, Chair Randolph. And it is really a pleasure to see how our agencies are working together. And I really appreciate our goals mutually to see that we can use these important meetings to collaborate, ask important questions, and understand how each agency is viewing some of these items. And so it is wonderful that you're setting the stage for that. And I thank you for that. Next, I'd like to call on Director Velasquez from California Department of Housing and Community Development. Director Velasquez, your opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair Norton, and thank you and welcome, Madam Chair Randolph. It's great to see you here in our first joint meeting. This collaboration, as you all know, of our three entities, continues to be vital, given California's ambitious goals for housing production, for more and cleaner transportation, and for climate change and air quality. And for every goal we'll talk about today and in the meetings after today, each of our agencies holds a different piece of the puzzle and different pieces that are equally important. So looking forward to the updates today. I know we'll be talking about California's work to transition to zero emission vehicles by 2035. This is incredibly important. This is an economy-wide transition, not just an issue of transportation and air quality. And it's also about providing the infrastructure so drivers of zero-emission vehicles can refuel. As some of you know, our department, HCD, has been working productively with CARB to ensure residential projects provide sufficient charging stations for tenants who drive electric vehicles. A lot of these conversations just happened very recently. Now, as we pursue new building standards, we must also constantly ask, how does this affect our other priorities? Installing and maintaining EV chargers comes with costs. And again, California has by far the biggest housing production cost anywhere in the country, some of the highest production costs for housing in the world. And if those costs are too high, will they increase the rents that tenants must pay, low-income tenants? And will this make homes less affordable? Arguably, the unintended consequences here can include inequities. And you both spoke very clearly about the importance in this administration to come and strengthen our agendas with an equity lens. So in these negotiations, we have to ask ourselves, could the increased cost price out housing projects completely? So we're sensitive to the risk that adding EV charging costs to residential construction, including actions that could actually increase vehicle miles traveled by chasing potential development out of the higher price jobs-rich areas. These are questions that we are aware and continue to tackle with CARB, with CTC, with the stakeholders, with many other agencies, and each of us brings different perspectives and objectives. And I believe today what you'll hear is the outcome of these conversations that I would characterize as outcomes that are balanced with a lot of strategic thinking, owing to the perspectives and expertise of numerous agencies and stakeholders. And as we continue to move forward with these important advancements in California's building code, we must continue to do so in a coordinated way. So I want to express my deep appreciation to this collaboration happening around these recent Green Code recommendations about these building standards. And today we'll also understand, we will hear about California State Transportation Agency on its draft plan to reduce as well greenhouse gases by reducing VMTs. I thank Cal staff for involving our department closely in the development of its climate action plan for transportation infrastructure. Accelerating housing production in jobs-rich areas must be part of the solution, because reducing vehicle miles traveled has as much to do with the destinations as it does with the mode of travel between them. And this is one reason why our department has been so focused on infill and transportation efficient housing production. We have to put so much emphasis on that. HCD oversees the regional housing needs allocation process and directly administer it for rural counties. This includes administering new statutory objectives for the sixth cycle, a very complicated upcoming sixth cycle that increases dramatically the number of housing that local jurisdictions have to produce, but it has to be with priorities: infill development, protection of environmental and agricultural resources, growth near transit, and reduction of greenhouse gases. Those four are important principles as we expect a lot more housing production in the next few years. And as a result, new local housing elements must plan, again, for increased numbers of affordable homes closer to where Californians need to be every day, reducing VMTs as much as possible. In February, our Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program, in partnership with the Strategic Growth Council, issued a notice of funding for more than $400 million to fund precisely transit-oriented housing and transit improvements. This coming month, we will issue an infill infrastructure grant program that will use close to another $200 million for infrastructure improvements needed to support infill residential or mixed-use development. I will use the phrase that recently Marcia Fudge, the new Secretary of HUD, used: housing is infrastructure. And I agree, Chairwoman Norton, we're very excited to see what is developing in DC, thanks to President Biden's big, bold infrastructure plan. Again, I'm just really excited to this collaboration. Sixth cycle, again, housing elements are coming up, very ambitious goals that we have to significantly increase production, but we have to do it, housing production, but we have to do it in a way that is smart. And as long as the three of our entities are talking, collaborating, strategically planning, I think we can achieve common objectives that are equally important. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Director Velasquez, for those very thoughtful remarks. And I think that one of the things that we have talked about, all of us, as the value of these joint meetings are our ability to think out loud and collaborate together with the public in these opportunities with presentations to talk about the future of California and how we actually implement the visions that are ahead of us. Governor Newsom and this legislature, by its courageous act for supporting SB1 and so many other pieces of legislation that are moving us forward, and Governor Newsom's executive orders and the Climate Action Plan for Transportation and Infrastructure, have already put California on the national map for vision for moving to a clean air future. Now we want to be able to put ourselves on the national map for implementation. And it's through our collaborative efforts that we will get there. And I thank you all for your time today. With that, we are going to give this opening remarks section a close. We have no public comment on it. And we're going to move specifically into our presentations because we have 4 presentations waiting, and they are all quite meaty. Our next item consists of 4 presentations, and I will ask my fellow commissioners, board members, HCD leadership, and members of the public to hold your questions until after we've heard all 4 presentations, with the exception of minor clarifying questions. We look forward to having a robust discussion on the topic of ZEV transition following the presentations. And all commissioners and board members who wish to speak in the opening remarks, you'll have a chance as long as you'd like to make those observations in this particular item and the following items. First, it is my pleasure to introduce Tyson Eckerly, Deputy Director of Zero Emission Vehicle Market Development from the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, or GoBiz. Thank you, Tyson, for being here today, and we really look forward to your presentation.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Chair Norton, for your introduction, and Chair Randolph and Director Velasquez. I'm excited to brief you all on where we are. And so I think maybe we'll pull up our slide deck, but really what we want to talk about today is the efforts under Governor Newsom's leadership to do our zero emission vehicle market development strategy. And really, this is developing the ZEV market is by definition a team sport. It takes all of us and more of us to make this all happen. And so what we're trying to do with this effort is to bring it all together. And if you go to the next slide, just wanted to anchor it. I think we're all very familiar with the executive order targets, but that's why we're here. And this was in September, you know, the 100% targets that you see up on the slide. It feels like that was 2 years ago. I don't know if you guys feel the same way or not, but this really set the direction. But within that executive order, Governor Newsom was really focused on implementation and execution. And that's where the ZEV strategy direction came down to go biz. And so we go to the next slide. I wanted to talk a little bit. So the whole zero emission vehicle market development strategy, the way we're thinking about it, really trying to achieve, 5 things at the top level. It's articulating the core principles for, collective action. Like, what are we really focused on? It's clearly identifying the metrics and targets. Like, what can we measure ourselves against, and agreed upon measurements so we can check in and everybody can quickly assess the health of the market and keep moving things forward. The third thing is really establishing clear roles and objectives for each agency and major stakeholder group, because we all have a big role to play in this. And then it's all about collective problem solving, right? It's bringing people together to solve these problems. No one group has all the answers or all the solution sets. And so that's part of the thing. We're trying to develop an ecosystem of action. And then the 5th one is just ensuring that the lessons learned are accessible and incorporated going forward. And ideally, we're trying to take the action and decision making and put it as close to the ground as possible, as close to the people who have the most information, and really empower the actors in the market to exceed expectations. And it's already happening. You see some announcements even just from Governor Newsom's executive order, which was very ambitious in September. And now all of a sudden you're seeing automakers stepping up and backing that up as well. And so it's happening quickly. If you go to the next slide, this is kind of an anchoring view of what we're thinking about for the market development strategy. So we're organizing around the 4 core market development pillars. That's vehicles, it's infrastructure, the end users, and workforce. And the idea being these pillars each have to be in balance to move the market forward. If one falls out of whack, we slow down. So it's built on a foundation of our core principles. And Chair Randolph, everybody, I think, on this dais, where the artificial dais, hinted at equity, right? And so we're really being intentional about getting equity into every decision. And so that's something we're continually challenging ourselves. Everything that we do, making sure that we are keeping our priority communities in mind. It's the idea of embracing all ZEV pathways. That's battery electric, it's fuel cell electric, it's high-speed rail, it's all those tools that we have that are zero emission. The idea of collective problem solving, which I talked about, Also, public, complementing private. So, the public policy can help increase certainty, but we need private capital to really scale the market, to get from where we are to where we need to be. And then we have real opportunities to design for resilience and adaptation. You'll hear a little bit more from CPUC later today, but it's not just a challenge, but it's also an opportunity to make our energy system more resilient. And then, these pillars feed up into the core outcomes that we're looking for, air quality, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, mobility access, which is a big part, I think, of what we're talking about today, and then economic development and jobs, with the ultimate goal of large-scale, equitable market development. And so if we go to the next slide, there's the ZEV Strategy website we've built out is really kind of our anchoring point. So this is the public website, has our targets. It'll be built out through time. It has the latest information, the documents. We're going to add a metrics portal that's, a lot of this is in development. If you go to the next slide, so housed in that website, you can get to the ZEV Strategy document. And I put this table, I'm not going to go through the table, but it's just a snapshot of stuff that's in the document. And right here we have, this is from NGOs, right? And I bring that up because we have objectives for 12 stakeholder groups. One of those stakeholder groups is agencies. State agencies have the most detail, but we're not losing sight of these core, NGOs, private industry. What we've done within each of those groups, we try to identify a clear lead for each of the pillars, if one exists. And then you can see a lot of supporting roles as well. But this document, the idea is to update it every 3 years and kind of use it as a North Star document. And so if you go to the next slide, still kind of looking at the ZEV Strategy document, this is we use GoBiz as an example just because, we can expose ourselves that way, but we set out clear objectives for each of the agencies. And these are the things that, over the course of these 3 years, each state agency would be focusing in on. The ZEV Strategy being one of them, if you look at the top graphic, and then also the key documents. And it was, some of the lists, like you look at CARB, for example, there are a lot of key documents that are pivotal to market understanding. We want to get those all in one place so people understand where the decisions are being made, where the analysis is being done. Then to go to the next slide, it's one thing to set objectives, but, I heard a good quote recently. It's, strategy is easy, execution is hard. These state agency action plans are really about execution. So it's taking those objectives and then identifying the key results and actions that we want each agency has identified to help move those objectives forward. And this is really where we're going to be focused on collecting the lessons learned. So these are annual plans. So we just published them on our website. You can click on the logos of each of the agencies and see what they're up to. And then at the end of the year, we'll go back. Okay, what did we achieve? What do we fall short of? Why? Why did we fall short, or why were we successful? And then apply that for the next action plan going forward. And so we'll kind of have this cadence of annual plans to keep pushing things. And I encourage you to take a look. And there's some agencies you might not have thought of that have a pretty important role to play. There's 29 agencies in all that are captured here. If we go to the next slide, I want to focus in on today. So there's lots of different ways you can skin the cat. I don't feel like it's a good analogy, but it came to my head. So sorry, I went down that road. But the 3 agencies we're talking about today, and you can do this for any number of the 29 agencies, but really, if you kind of pull them all together, it's really investing and planning to get people out of cars, and if they're in cars or freight is into zero emission vehicles. And so what I've done here in my handwriting, and sorry, I've really enjoyed the Surface pen, but I've just put a very quick summary of the objectives of each of the agencies. And so if you look at the Air Resources Board is kind of the heart and soul of the ZEV market. They set the pace. It's health, it's greenhouse gases driving forward. But underlined, so they're responsible for analysis, for regulations, for incentives. I've underlined in green, those are places where within the action plan, CARB has actively called out collaboration with the California Transportation Commission, for example. And then if you look at market expansion, that's an active collaboration with the housing HCD, sorry. And so the same thing for the California Transportation Commission. regional planning calls out collaboration with the Air Resources Board. And so there's lots of opportunity, and going through is kind of a fun exercise in preparation for this panel. There's probably more that we missed, and so what we were challenging the agencies, not challenging, but what we gave direction for, so really focusing on who do you need for the to collaborate with, and what can you do to get equity into every decision, make sure we're taking care of priority communities. So that's kind of, for today. And then if we go to the next slide, the final piece that we're working on, so after the agency action plans, is this idea of annual pillar priority action plans. I've already changed the organization of this, but what we're trying to do is bring everything together, because the market doesn't evolve in just these 4 siloed pillars. It's bringing everything together. And so this action plan will take into account in each of the pillars, what do we need to do to help move the market forward? There's, the idea of increasing shared understanding of progress within each of those pillars. The idea of, what's happening in backbone policy development, and, where's regional leadership. But then if you roll it all up and you look, from a holistic view, the things that really need to happen, we need infrastructure. It's the key enabler for the market. We need people to get to yes. We need them to say yes to zero emission, or yes to living without a car, or getting freight into cleaner freight options. Once we have those 2 components, if you're kind of working your way around the circle, we got to get to scale and focus on increasing investor confidence and bringing private capital into the market. And then, of course, being California, and we have a great leg up. We have 34 manufacturers in California of zero emission vehicles. It's really building the industry here, making sure we get those economic development opportunities. And then finally, it's about implementation and pulling this all together. So that'd be one kind of the multi-pillar action plan. We're also working on an equity engagement strategy closely with all the agencies who have their hands in equity. And really, just if there's one word about that, it's listening, right? It's going out to the communities, making sure that we're hearing from communities, and making sure that we all understand who is doing what and how we can engage, and that we're not asking the same things of the same people in multiple agencies, but really having a unified approach going forward. It's a really important piece. And so if you go to the next slide, on the website, we have a sign up link to stay engaged. We call it our roll up your sleeves list. These are people who are willing to be emailed more frequently and give feedback. We're trying to create, that sense of that team sport. And then finally, just wanted to introduce kind of the rest of the panel as the next slide. Just the connection, right? If you look at HCD, it's the multifamily building standards, which, really is crucial in enabling easier ZEV adoption. And that you'll hear from CPUC. It's about grid resilience and vehicle grid integration. How do we create that robust energy system that is dependable through time? And then Access Clean California with grid alternatives. I think, it showcases and highlights how important NGO partnership is to success, especially as we work to advance equity. And just want to keep in mind, there are 24 other agencies that we aren't directly talking about here who have a hand in the market, and multiple stakeholders who have pivotal roles to play. And so we're just trying to pull that all together and create that ecosystem of success. And so with that, I'll hand it over. Thank you very much for your attention, and we'll look forward to the questions later.
Thank you very, very much, Tyson. And it was very, very helpful to see how you see all of our agencies, and we'll have more discussion about that later. We really appreciate your robust presentation today. Our second presentation will be provided by Kyle Kraus, who work in codes and standards at the California Department of Housing and Community Development. Kyle?
Yes, good morning, Madam Chair Norton, and good morning, Madam Chair Randolph. I'm super excited, and on behalf of Director Velasquez and the Department of Housing and Community Development, I'm really happy to present you an update on HCD's proposed changes to the Cal Green Code. This will be the 2022 Cal Green Code that will be effective January 1st of 2023. I can also thank Director Velasquez for updating our mission statement at HCD. The new mission statement is to promote safe, affordable homes and vibrant, inclusive, sustainable communities for all Californians. I mention this because we really rely on this mission as we endeavor to strike the balance between housing affordability and ensuring that we are addressing climate change and safety of Californians. So that's really an exciting change that I think really recognizes the issues that we're all facing. I want to also take the opportunity to thank our partners in this work. Tyson mentioned that we really rolled up our sleeves. We absolutely rolled up our sleeves in this work. So I want to thank CARB, instrumental in working with HCD on this, GoBiz, Tyson and Hannah, the governor's office, the Building Standards Commission. I want to recognize them also. The legislature, building industry was key in this discussion, and our many EV charging advocates and coalitions for their valuable input as we developed the proposal. Special thanks to Emily Withers on my state housing law program team. She is not able to join me this morning because she's very busy continuing the development of our building standards packages for submittal. If we could go to the next slide, please. This work and HCDs Authority is really important, and I want to mention that we do rely on our authority in the Health and Safety Code, specifically the state housing law and building standards law. This is what guides us and tells us what we should do as we propose adoption of building standards. It also sets barriers. Building standards law contains 9-point criteria, and that tells us that our proposals cannot conflict with state law. So building standards is a very important tool to move forward as we address climate change and health and safety. And I just wanted to mention that because I think often there is either a lack of fully understanding our limitations by some of our stakeholders, and it's important that we do rely on that guiding statute. Next slide, please. So electric vehicle charging has really moved forward. When we adopted the initial provisions in Cal Green, it really included EV charging capability. So we go back to executive orders by Governor Brown and Governor Newsom that really give us our guiding light as we move forward looking at proposing new building standards. The terminology, next slide please, that's important to recognize. As I mentioned, we have EV charging capability that's now transitioning to actual EV charging access. So these terminology are important when we talk about what an EV charging space is or EV charging station, what is an EV capable space or an EV ready space. And then what is level 2 EV supply equipment. These definitions have been proposed for modification to the Cal Green Code to provide more details as we get into the details of the actual requirements. So next slide, please. I'll talk more about these as we go. So in 2019, as I mentioned a minute ago, we started with EV capable, and this was really applicable to new single family and townhouses with attached garages. So this is a panel capacity in the electrical panel, a raceway, and capability of installing conductors and receptacles or chargers. We've continued this forward. It's really the right target for single family homes and duplexes. It allows the resident or owner of these buildings to install the right conductors, the right overcurrent protection for the specific charger that they want to use. So we've carried that forward because that was the right mark for detached single family. Next slide, please. As we move into our really aggressive changes, we're continuing to bring forward for multifamily dwellings 10% of the parking spaces are going to be EV capable. And this is really to ensure that we can always install more chargers in the future that are the high power level 2 charging that provides the quickest charge when installed. In 2019, there was no chargers that were required. This was just capability. And if we can go to the next slide, this is where we're really pivoting to requiring additional charging. So again, for new hotels and motels, we've increased the amount of EV capable from 6% to 10% of the parking spaces. And then we'll go to the next slide. And when we get into the changes for 2022, where EV charging access becomes available, now our proposal that's been submitted to the Building Standards Commission, really for the first time, we're requiring level 2 charging receptacles. So this would be 240 volt receptacles where an EV owner can use the cord set that comes with their vehicle and plug into a receptacle in the parking area and charge their vehicle at low power level 2. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And then in addition to those 25% of the parking spaces, 5% of the parking spaces in new multifamily dwellings, hotels, and motels will be required to have level 2 chargers. This is a really significant step. We are with our work with our stakeholders, have arrived at this balance to provide EV charging access for many residents that want to purchase or already own electric vehicles and need a place to charge. And charging at their place of residence is fundamental in allowing people to make that step to purchase and own an electric vehicle. Next slide, please. Again, when we're talking about existing buildings, there was legislation back in 2019, AB 684, that tasked HCD with proposing requirements for existing buildings to existing multifamily buildings to have EV charging capability. So in the 2019 code, the current code, there are no requirements for existing buildings to provide any type of EV access. We are proposing for the first time some requirements for existing buildings that are undergoing additions of new parking facilities or alterations of existing parking facilities, such as installation of a solar array over the parking area, a solar shade structure, many call it, where if those permitted alterations are taking place, that we would require in the code 10% of those new parking spaces or altered spaces to have EV charging capability. This is really significant. I want to mention back to our authority. Generally, HCDs Authority is for newly constructed buildings. However, there's a narrow channel that we have in our authority, especially within Cal Green, to propose requirements to additions or alterations of certain triggers. So we're carefully threading that needle using our authority that the legislature has granted us to try to find the right spot to, for the first time, address existing buildings. Next slide, please. Now, so the voluntary measures, if any of you aren't aware, Cal Green has mandatory measures and voluntary measures. Cal Green Tier 1 and Tier 2 are more aggressive voluntary tiers that can be adopted by local government to enhance the green building requirements. So these tiers for 2022 Cal Green have been increased from the baseline mandatory requirements for EV capable spaces. And that helps local governments provide that more aggressive requirement based on local needs. Next slide, please. So this shows what we're talking about. When I say a low power level 2 receptacle, this is what we're talking about. This is a place that you can plug in your cord set that comes with your car. So the cord set is shown in the left picture here, coming from the vehicle up to the receptacle that's on the wall. This also shows a portable level 2 charger, which is an adapter that can allow the vehicle to plug in from the vehicle directly to the charging port into this low power level 2 receptacle. This is something that we worked with stakeholders on. There was an initial ask for level 1 charging. At our second focus group meeting, there was really a realization that level 1 charging was just going to take too long for many people with longer drive times or longer drive distances, and they really had a need for a faster charging. So the low power level 2, 240 volt, 16 amp was the result of that collaboration and agreement. So that's the starting point for the receptacles, what are low power level 2 receptacles. Next slide, please. And then this here is a level 2 charger that can be installed. So this is the one that would be installed in 5% of the multifamily parking spaces in hotels and motels. This provides a faster charge. This is level 2 charging at 240 volt, 40 amp, which provides 32 amps of power into the vehicle and really shortens the charge time. So for people that have larger batteries and longer drive times, greater distance, this provides a much faster method of charging. And next slide, please. Some of the costs that go into this, CARB staff was very helpful in researching and providing economic and fiscal impact, another requirement for submittal to the Building Standards Commission. So the low power level 2 receptacles range from about $780 to a little over $1,400 each. Whereas the level 2 chargers are significantly more. They range from $2,300 to $3,700. Sometimes when we're increasing electrical loads, it requires additional transformers. So the electrical infrastructure on the site can also be increased by this proposal. So the addition of extra transformers or larger transformers will range from $1,900 to almost $2,300. The statewide impact over 3 years of this proposal is very significant, from 104 million to 182 million over the life cycle of this code proposal. I want to talk a little bit about the 3-year proposal. So every 3 years we do a triennial adoption. That's our current cycle. There's also 18-month intervening code adoption cycles, and it's really important that as these mandatory and voluntary measures hit the road and take effect, that we continue to develop the next iteration of CalGreen changes. It'll be very important to monitor and get feedback from building industry and building owners as these requirements are put into play out on construction sites where we're building these, installing these, people are using these. We're getting that feedback so that we can then, in the intervening cycle and next triennial cycle, accelerate these to move these forward and put more people in electric vehicles. Next slide, please. which is the final slide. So I would like to open it up to any questions for HCD, and I'm happy to take those now.
Thank you. We're going to take all questions at the end of all the presentations, so I appreciate you being available. We will be referring to your presentation, and this was very helpful, and I know a lot of us have questions about this. We're going to go through all presentations so we can do that first, and then we really appreciate you being ready for questions and answers after. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, and our next presentation, our third presentation for today, is going to be given by Julia Schmidt, advisor to Commissioner Rechtschaffen of the California Public Utilities Commission. Julia?
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for bringing up my slides. I was asked to speak a little more focused way regarding specifically grid resilience and ZEVs. And so I'll touch primarily on that. If you could forward the slide, please. Thank you. Just a quick outline. I'll be focusing on resilience, which I agree with Tyson represents both a challenge and an opportunity for ZEVs as they become a bigger and bigger part of our fleets. So if you could please go on to the next slide. So I think we all understand this pretty well, but I just wanted to give a little bit of a sense of scale in terms of how quickly the fleets will start to roll over, both the light duty and the medium and heavy duty. I know these seem like dates that are pretty far away, but in the world of major infrastructure, 10 years is really just around the corner. So we're definitely thinking very hard about the numbers of cars, and that includes buses and medium and heavy duty vehicles that will be plugging in very, very soon, and the type of infrastructure that they will need to meet that load. So I won't go through this exhaustive list, but the point is merely that we are expecting just massive numbers of cars to start to become electric and therefore plug into the electric grid. Next slide, please. So for those of you who don't know us, we at the California Public Utilities Commission regulate the electric utilities. That is primarily the three large electric utilities, PG&E, Southern California Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric. There are three smaller ones as well. And altogether, they provide about 75% of the electric infrastructure of the state, the other quarter being provided by municipal or publicly owned utilities such as SMUD and LADWP. So when we think about electric vehicle infrastructure, we first and foremost think about the distribution grid, which is going to need to be almost certainly expanded to support this new electric load. And then we think about make-ready infrastructure. And that's a little bit of a wonky term, but it essentially describes what kind of infrastructure is needed to charge EVs to support electric charging after that service drop. So every customer, be it a house or a business, has a wire that's dedicated that goes to them. And after that, you start to think about the make-ready infrastructure. So the meter is sort of the dividing line in our world between utility side of the grid and the customer side of, their side of the grid. And make-ready infrastructure on the utility side could include more wiring, conduit, trenching. And on the customer side, we think about also additional wiring, but also possibly a panel upgrade, and then that EV charger itself. So that's all the kind of aspects of infrastructure needed to charge electric vehicles. And then in a kind of less physical sense, we think about behavioral aspects of EV charging that also impact the grid. That includes when and where vehicles are plugged in. And I'll definitely delve into vehicle grid integration that Tyson mentioned as well. So next slide, please. So again, just to give a sense of scale, I won't delve into a lot of details, but the PUC has already authorized substantial investment in TE infrastructure. And by the way, I'm focused a lot on electric vehicles, but of course, ZEVs includes a wider range of vehicles, and we are starting to think about, for example, hydrogen fuel vehicles as well. But we've done a lot more thinking on the EV side, and we've authorized over $1.5 billion for those three major utilities that I mentioned. About half and half between medium and heavy duty and light duty vehicles. Light duty vehicle infrastructure generally that we fund that the utilities have major programs in includes public charging and workplace charging. And public could be EV stations at grocery stores and other destination centers. We don't do a lot of utility investment in single family homes. There's a pretty well-developed private market there, and folks tend to buy their own charger or use other incentives that are not utility specific for that, although we do have a few programs there. So next slide, please. So as we've done this sort of massive investment in transportation electrification, and as we think about, substantially more, certainly, we've realized that we probably need a more organized approach to utility proposals. What we have done in these last 4 or 5 years is, as utilities propose programs, be it for, let's say, forklift electrification or public charging, or honestly, dozens of programs, we've kind of taken them on one by one. We have a substantial stakeholder process that is a legalistic process that involves evidentiary hearings and testimony. And so it's been, well, frankly, somewhat slow to approve all of these individual proposals. So just last year, we issued a policy that we hope will streamline future approvals called the Transportation Electrification Framework. It's available there on the website. It's a pretty massive document, and I won't go into all the sections, but I will touch on the resilience section because I know that there's been some concern among the agencies here, both how vehicles will charge in times of outages and also how they can help grid needs to prevent outages or to prevent stress times for the grid. So we touch on the subjects of communication with customers regarding upcoming outages, build out of backup power resources for times when outages are occurring so that vehicles need to charge, availability of public charging, which is a good alternative if customers cannot charge at home during an outage, and finally, repairing utility infrastructure after a natural disaster such as a wildfire, for example, so that EVs can continue to charge. So if you can please go to the next slide. So the type of outage that I think there's most concern about is, it's called a public safety power shutoff. If you've read the papers, you know what that is. And I should back up and say, outages that we've all experienced over the past decades are often in kind of the regular course of business for utility. There can be distribution lines that go down, and so on and so forth, and those are relatively rare. But a new type of outage that we've started to think about just in the last few years is one that the utility proactively undertakes because of wildfire threats or the concern that its infrastructure may spark wildfires. So the CPUC has authorized the use of this type of outage, the PSPS, but it has issued some very detailed rules about how it can be used. And oh, sorry, I thought there was a question. The first and foremost that we think about with regard to EVs is the communication component. So utilities are required to give notice of 2 to 3 days to customers before performing a PSPS. And the number one thing we hope they do, in addition to preparing their home and whatever else they need to do, is charge up their EV to the maximum so that they're able to leave the area if it's necessary. We are also having utilities conduct a detailed assessment of the effect of PSPS on various components of transportation, not just EVs, but as I list here, bridges and tunnels and so on. But EVs are among them. And if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And we are also highlighting technologies that utilities need to explore and start to fund that we think will alleviate some of these concerns. One is mobile EV fast charging. And I'm no expert on the engineering side, but I think it looks largely like a battery that is on a vehicle, the back of a truck or so on and so forth, that can drive around to areas that are affected by an outage and folks can plug in. We are emphasizing the communication components of letting customers know where public charging is available, especially fast charging, that's level 3 down here, but also level 2. So that if customers experience an outage in their home, they cannot charge their EV, there's somewhere they can go, hopefully nearby, where they can charge. And finally, we're having the utilities consider and fund backup generation at certain key sites so that, again, EV charging can go on. And I didn't want to start to exhaustively list other commission decisions here, but I will note that funding for a lot of these items has been authorized, for example, in our December decision from 4 months ago on the low carbon fuel standard, where we authorized the utilities to use 1/3 of the LCFS funds for equity and resilience projects. And those resilience projects that we highlight are essentially in these categories. We also have funding available for similar projects under our microgrids proceeding. And even in our decisions that we'll be looking to approve the transportation electrification framework I've highlighted earlier, one of the near-term priority areas for investment that we've already pointed out is resilience. And again, that's going to be projects in these categories. So I think that, so I want to highlight that we're taking this issue very seriously. Yes, thank you. No, please go on to the next slide. But we are thinking very hard about what happens to customers as they are more and more dependent on electricity for their mobility during times of outages. So we've gone over the challenge component of resilience, but I also do want to say there are some exciting opportunities there as well. So one emerging area is called vehicle grid integration, and it's a little bit of a confusing term because it covers a lot of sort of different behaviors and software and hardware. But the essential idea is we would like to optimize how vehicles interact with the grid as they charge. So the very kind of basic level is VGI that I have there, and that is something we call smart charging or managed charging. And that's the idea that the time that a vehicle chooses to charge, and this could be your own EV, but it could be also a large vehicle like a bus, really matters to the grid. And we are building some pretty strong price signals to communicate that to customers. We now have time of use or even special EV time of use rates available, both to residential and large customers. And those essentially communicate that if you plug in the middle of the day, that can be very stressful to the grid. As a matter of fact, that can really start to diminish the available capacity we have to serve customers. And so it's very expensive. Whereas plugging in the middle of night, for example, is quite cheap. We do see customers being quite responsive to that because it really affects the cost of fueling. And as time goes on, we will build more and more sophisticated ways to communicate that price signal, including dynamic rates that will hopefully start to show, for example, as we bring more renewables onto the grid, we expect to have some over generation in the middle of the day. For example, in spring when it's not very hot, so our electric load's not very high, but we do have really substantial solar generation. That could be a great time for EVs to plug in, and we'll have price signals to communicate that and encourage folks to do so. Then V2G is sort of the level 2.0 of VGI, and that is the ability of vehicles to actually feed power back to the grid. And that's really exciting for us because that can save us from potentially needing to keep more power plants online just for those few stressed hours of the year. If we could have the sort of mobile but responsive fleet of batteries out around the state that can plug in and provide just that little bit of power we need at really key times. We are already overcoming some of the technology barriers to that. We have actually bidirectional vehicles out on the roads today, including some passenger vehicles. We have some regulatory barriers, including figuring out how to pay customers for those services, but we're optimistic that we will overcome that within a few years. And finally, that last bullet point has to do with vehicles that can at least power the home or perhaps the emergency response center or the community rec center that needs power during an outage. And that again is just around the corner, I hope. We have the technological ability and we're working on the regulatory aspects. Next slide, please. This is my final slide. I think we've gone over it pretty well. We understand the top two benefits of VGI, but I do want to highlight the bottom two benefits, which is it's not just good for the grid. We're hoping that it's good for the customer. We actually would like to see the ability to provide services back to the grid and be compensated for it, lower the cost of ownership for example, low-income customers who may not yet be able to afford an EV. and certainly ought to lower the overall cost of charging for everyone to the extent that they're able to charge during those low cost times. So next slide, I think is just my contact information. Feel free to reach out, and I'm here for questions after the presentations.
Madam Chair, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Madam Schmidt. And I wanted to thank you for your enlightening presentation. And now we're going to move to our final presentation by Taria McComber, who is the Electric Vehicle Director and Project Director for Clean California, Access for Clean California and Grid Alternatives. Ms. McComber? Thank you. Can you test your volume?
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay.
We can, thank you. Unlike me, who was on mute. Thanks so much.
I almost did the same thing, no worries. I'm actually using my laptop webcam, so let me just adjust my notes so I'm not always looking at the left. And look at you all. Hi, I'm Taria McComber. I use she, her pronouns, and as Hillary said, I am Project Director of Access Clean California. Today I am giving this presentation from Western Shoshone, Southern Paiute land in Las Vegas, actually. So next slide. So I wanted to start with this slide because 2021 marks the 402nd year that African men, women, and children were first brought to this country as slaves. Captured people began their journey, sometimes walking as far as 300 miles to the coast before boarding a ship for their 5,000-mile journey across the Atlantic to the United States. Clean, quote-unquote, mobility in the form of sail ships, harnessing the wind for fuel, transported 10 to 12 million people as non-humans over the course of 350 years around the world. I start my presentations with this history, really no matter the audience, because it is important for me to share that me and my ancestors have an intimate connection with clean mobility, and that transportation equity is not a choice for me, and not to speak on behalf of communities, but for the communities that Access Clean California serves, it's not a choice for them either. As I lead the development of Access Clean California, I embody equity in every aspect of my decision-making, as I want to make sure that we continue to surface how we might leverage this inflection point of transitioning to clean transportation to also recognize how we can make mobility and movement safe and inclusive for everyone by recognizing history such as this. Next slide, please. So today I plan to give you a quick overview of our project, Access Clean California. We were asked to share what communities need to reach those goals that Tyson went over earlier, and just a path forward. And I think I'm the last presentation, so I will open up to questions for all the presentations, I believe. Next slide. So Access Clean California is formerly known as the One Stop Shop Pilot Project, and we're a 3-year pilot that started in 2018. And really, we want to create an easy and comprehensive way for our communities that have the greatest barriers to access, to accessing California's transportation equity and related clean energy programs. So we are funded currently out of CARB, so we obviously started with the low carbon transportation equity programs, but because we're Grid Alternatives, we were able to easily already bring into conversations and into our strategies, how do we continue to create great access to CPUC's DAC SASH and SASH programs. So there's charging infrastructure, transit vouchers that many of these incentive programs give. There's amazing shared mobility programs that are already online. And I just mentioned solar. Next slide. So this, I don't know if it's my screen. I hope everyone can see the full screen. But we come out of the SB3 barriers studies. So part A was done by CEC and part B was done by CARB. And they both mention that a one-stop shop would really create greater access for all these programs that have existed and that are coming online this year, next year, and for a few years to come for us to reach these really progressive goals. Next slide, please. So Access Clean California takes two strategies. So the first one, and the one that's many times focused on, is the streamlined user-centered application process. So this is the what we call the benefits finder on our website, but it also includes our case management processes that we're starting to build, and as much as we can, the two-way feedback that we give to CARB and that CARB continues to give to outreach partners for us to continue to build and to build strong programs that our communities can reach. The second strategy is coordinated outreach for equity programs. So there's amazing outreach partners, NGOs, CBOs, all those acronyms, community-based organizations that have trust already, and they exist because they are doing a really great job of bringing resources, education, and awareness to all programs that can support their community. So how do we continue to leverage these standing pillars and communities to give this education and awareness in both a culturally reflective way as well as an inclusive way? Next slide, please. So I believe that the organizers can show this quick demo video. It's a quick animation that just shows exactly what the benefits finder does versus you all trying to visualize it yourselves. So I hope that that video is pulled up. And I'll take the chance to drink a little bit of tea.
California has lots of programs to help people afford electric cars and other clean energy upgrades. Accessing these benefits shouldn't be hard, but unfortunately, it can get complicated. This is Alma and her family. They have an old, inefficient car that's no good for their wallet or the planet. Alma wishes she could afford something cleaner and more reliable, but she assumes electric vehicles are out of her reach and doesn't have time to do a lot of research. At Access Clean California, we help people like Alma learn what benefits are available and get their application started in one easy place, designed with their needs in mind. Our benefits finder is simple and visual, and it's easy for Alma to get help with more complicated questions. Right away, she can see all the funding available to her, which programs can be combined, and any extra benefits she's eligible for. And she can actually begin her applications right there without sifting through fine print. Soon, Alma and her family will be saving money and contributing to a cleaner California. With Access Clean California, we can bring together all the state's climate equity programs and make it easy for people like Alma to make the change. Get behind the move to clean energy for everyone.
So thank you for showing that. So next slide. So apologies that, I hope you can't hear the leaf blower right now. Apologies about that. So what that video shows is just, we've built a benefits finder to make it really easy for our community members that are ready to get a new car, that need a new vehicle, and also want to take advantage of solar now, or shared mobility programs, that they can easily understand what they're eligible for, but then also apply to it. So as of April 1st, we actually started to, we did a pilot of a pilot to test out how income verification could work from a centralized tool. The benefits finder was built using a human-centered design process. So throughout this project, we've tried to build things pretty quickly and then put it in the community's hands to iterate upon it for them to give us feedback and then say, this works, this doesn't work, the way you're explaining this doesn't make any sense to us. And their fingerprints, our outreach partners and all of our community's fingerprints are really all over this benefits finder, and really the website. The way that we explain charging, for example, is completely informed by what our community said is the easiest way for folks to understand those technologies. So these are the programs that are currently part of the benefits finder. And obviously, we are always thinking about other programs that we can put on the benefits finder, and our communities are very vocal about the additional programs that they want as part of the benefits finder. So we're doing our best to work within our pilot timeline as well as our pilot funding to get some additional programs on here as soon as possible. And I think one of them is going to be Empower EV. Next slide, please. I will not go through this. I really put this slide in here for folks that are downloading the presentations and using them as just pieces of information. So this is the full journey for applicants that are using the benefits finder, from starting with our outreach partners having an event. Now those events are mostly virtual and much smaller, or someone just finds our website on their own and then goes through the benefits finder, understands what they're eligible for, applies to that program, and actually gets into the clean mobility that they need. And actually, our next slide is going to show you Erica's journey and how she not only received an electric vehicle, but then she was able to leverage getting solar, so she's able to charge her vehicle at home. So let's watch that video really quickly. Just much more beautiful explanation of our community's journey.
I don't spend any money on gas. I have not been to a gas station since I bought my car a year ago. Hallelujah. I cannot tell you how freeing that is. My name is Erica Williams and I live in Pomona, California. I commute to LA every day. I've probably spent anywhere from $250 to $300 a month on gas, and that's no longer an expense I have. I pull into my driveway and I plug my car in. How easy is that? Once I drove my first EV, there was no looking back. I never thought about a gas-powered car again. I just felt kind of free, like I was flying or something. Actually, I was not going to look at them. They weren't affordable in my head. Once I started educating myself, I started finding out about all the incentives that are out there. Then I started seeing maybe I can do this, you know? So it was all about the incentives. Yes, it is possible right now for you to get into an electric vehicle. I bought my car in September of last year, and by December I had solar panels installed. So I now have solar on my roof, charging system. I have my electric vehicle. I just checked my electric bill. Even with the super dry summer that we had, I had a credit in those months, and I'm charging my car. So it makes sense. If you're in the market for a car, you need to look at electric vehicles. You just can't afford not to at this point.
Is amazing, and we have a few other videos that we finished and that we're also creating to really be able to tell this story, not just to communities, but also to all of us that are on this meeting today, that this is completely plausible and it's happening right now, and folks are stacking on their own. So Erica didn't necessarily use our benefits finder, but she was able to navigate this with a grid Los Angeles to be able to get all the benefits that she was eligible for. So we're able to stack those programs together to really give her a holistic kind of climate, I like to say climate resiliency package, in the form of clean mobility as well as solar. Next slide, please. So the second strategy is really the most important strategy, even though a lot of folks are excited about the benefits finder in the website. The statewide outreach network that we are building is the only way we've actually gotten to having a benefits finder and having stories to share like Erica's, and a few others that we're finishing recording now. We knew from the very beginning of this project, even in our application, that we needed to leverage trusted community-based organizations and just community pillars to be able to bring these programs to their community, but also to for them to be able to give us feedback on what is the best way for them to be able to access these benefits. So we kind of bucket them into 4 buckets of our climate justice and equity partners. Actually, let's go to the next slide, because this is just a visual. We have them all written down. So our climate justice and equity partners includes Grid 7 California affiliates that are their own nonprofits with their own boards that reflect the communities that they're serving. We have our new outreach partner, Ecology Action, and Community Housing Development Corporation and EV Noir have also been really supportive in getting us to this 3rd year of our pilot and being as successful as we have. Trusted CBOs like CCAC that joined us this year with their 9 Central Valley-based CBOs, incredible as well. Liberty Hill has been on this project since the very beginning. Ben is one of the first people I met from our outreach partner network that we had started to build. And then this year, we're really excited that we were able to launch what we are calling a technical assistance and capacity building pilot with 6 community-based organizations that really don't have necessarily the capacity just yet to be able to apply to support some of these programs on their own. So we've built this year-long curriculum, as well as have brought them into this statewide outreach that we've built, outreach network that we've built, which includes a web-based resource hub that includes a whole bunch of materials for them to leverage, including marketing materials, videos like the ones you saw for Erica, training materials, as well as a lot of materials translated in not just Spanish, but several other languages for them to leverage within their community. So we're really excited to get feedback from that pilot of a pilot again to see how we can continue to create opportunities for CBOs to be supportive directly without having to even kind of go through what is Access Clean California. And the last 2, and the ones that I'm still kind of blown by, is the fact that we're able to work with Native American organizations and sovereign nations and really they bring so much knowledge and wisdom about the experience of what it means to live in rural California. As well as just the Native experience in not such rural parts of the state. So we feel honored that they're working with us. And then leveraging the largest labor union in the state, California, California SEIU, all of our home workers, home care workers, and education workers, and all of our service employees. How do we leverage our labor unions to also do education and awareness for folks that rely on transportation to get to their jobs and continue to be the essential workers that really have allowed a lot of us to survive during this pandemic. So next slide is just a title slide. And so let's get into what we have been hearing from our communities and from this outreach network for the past 2.5 years, 2018. So biggest thing, and we've spoken about it many times today, is program alignment and coordination, and really specifically around a qualification, so the requirements of the programs and the income verification process of the program. That's honestly why we built a pilot of a pilot, an income verification pilot, is to test out what does centralized income verification look like. Why do we ask some of our community members that are clearly needing of assistance to prove that they are poor over and over and over again? So how do we centralize that and streamline it and coordinate some categorical income verification across many programs? And then we continuously hear from our outreach partners to have some more data and reporting in a way that they can actually leverage to do more focused and targeted outreach on their end. They're hoping that they're reaching everyone, but they would love to know more information on how they can target their outreach even more to reach the communities that they might not even know that they're not reaching. They've also said coordinated and streamlined and funded outreach. So that's something that we're trying to do with the outreach network, is create this resource hub for everyone to pull from. We also have a dashboard that shows where outreach is being done by the outreach network, so folks can partner and coordinate and say, hey, we're also thinking of having an event, let's partner on this and bring these communities together to talk about the same thing. We might be talking about housing, but let's talk about transportation too. Let's streamline and coordinate these conversations, because many of our community members know all of this is interconnected and they don't really have the opportunity or the option to talk about their lives in silos of transportation, housing, charging, so on and so forth. I'll skip a couple. I think the most important is the last two as well, which is financial and education and consumer protection. Some programs are giving incredible incentives, but then they're also issuing 1099s, which means that our community members have to report that as income. So for some folks, Jill from the ED of the Native American Environmental Protection Coalition has shared that some of the community members that she works with make less than $10,000 a year. So if they're receiving an incentive for, scrap and replace can give up to $12,000, that is a significant jump in income. So we don't want to transition folks into clean mobility and sacrifice possibly their government benefits like CalFresh. So coordinating with additional government benefits such as CalFresh, Medi-Cal, housing subsidies, to really make sure that going back to not having folks have to continuously talk about the fact that they need support, we can leverage all of the work that we're already doing and really become efficient in getting folks transitioning to clean mobility and clean energy. So this last slide really is just kind of showing, I'm just going to pull up my notes here, the different ways that our communities are communicating what they need. So as I've mentioned many times, we really need to continue to leverage trusted community-based organizations. Some of the challenges that we saw with vaccine distribution is that folks didn't know that vaccines were in their community, or if they were, they weren't able to access them because they didn't really know how to use the technology, internet needed to sign up for an appointment. So really leveraging the folks that are giving resources and are trusted in communities already. Let's fund them to do this education and awareness. Let's ensure that our communities are being spoken to and being brought these programs in a culturally relevant and a reflective way. Electric vehicles are transportation, and something I've heard before is that your car can denote who you voted for. Our cars are very personal to us. My uncle will not be driving a Prius anytime soon. He is a Cadillac man to the end. Additionally, standardizing quantitative and qualitative data collection to evaluate the effectiveness of these programs is really important, and really making sure that we're staying nimble and agile enough to respond to what communities need. We heard at the beginning of the pandemic that no one was thinking about buying a car. So we had to adjust outreach strategies very quickly because a lot of these outreach partners were the the community's resource around COVID-19 education. And then lastly, we need to make it mandatory for programs to coordinate with each other. There's so many opportunities for effectiveness and efficiency in the just transition to this cleaner future that we can attain if we coordinate and work together on the program level as well. So that's all I have for you today. Everyone has access to this presentation. Please visit us at accesscleancalifornia.org, and I look forward to any questions or thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your very in-depth and thorough presentation. I know people have lots of questions and input and are really interested to hear a little bit more about the participants and how this program has gone. I am excited to ask that the public be sure to raise your hands and get into the queue to speak before we are going to start with our commissioners and board members, but we welcome public comment, and there's a lot to go through for very significant presentations. And so the first video turned on that I see is my Vice Chair, Bob Alvarado.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Taria, you're a breath of fresh air. I mean, I've been talking for the last 3 or 4 meetings that poor and middle-class people commute. They're being priced out of the urban core. They have to drive to where they either can afford the rent, or if they're lucky enough to qualify for a loan, where they can afford to buy. There's an article this morning about a $50 billion race to save America's renters from eviction. I mean, that's what we're facing right now. And a lot of that is because, you know, there's some folks that just can't afford that urban core anymore. What I'm a little distressed about this whole presentation is we have not, that I've seen, reached out to the business community about moving jobs to where people live. We keep talking about infill, high density housing, and as you've seen, when people were allowed to work from home, they fled that inner urban core. They ran out to the suburbs. That's a reality. So we've got to find a way to sit down with the business community and move those jobs to where people can afford to live. I think that's just one of the most important things that we can do. Taria, I'm going to reach out to you. There's a lot of construction workers that commute. I'm really glad to see that you're working with SEIU. Those are the folks that represent hotel workers and janitors and those low income and some middle income folks. So it's a big step. One last thing, and I noticed in a couple of slides where there were a couple of different chargers. One of the things that infuriates me about our cell service is we have 10 or 12 or 14 different systems hanging on a telephone pole, hanging on poles by the side of the road. If we could, I see that you're working on the plugs, but we need to work on the software, because you're going to have 12 different charging stations and 3 different companies with 3 different accounts with 3 different softwares, and you're going to pull up and not be able to plug into any of them. We should have a standardized software, so when you pull up to a charging station, you should be able to plug into it, and the software, instead of locking you out, you should be able to plug in, and the software should figure out how to bill you after that. We've got to find a way that when you have 10 chargers, you should have everybody have access to every single one of them. Thank you.
Thank you. And I was wondering if Mr. Eckerly or Ms. Schmidt would like to respond to the vision about how the array of chargers and companies that are going to be handling those chargers, how you see those working within your PUC and GoBiz EV management systems.
Yulia, I was going to see if you wanted to start off on the, the integration of all the charges across, and then I'd be happy to fill in after.
Yeah, this is definitely a very relevant concern right now. There's a lot of work being done in the industry to standardize communication protocols and also the actual chargers, so that regardless of whether you drive up to Tesla is going to be a different example, but regardless of whether you drive up to a charge point or another kind of charger, you can plug in whatever car it is you're driving. And we are down to just 2 major types of chargers. At some point, we'll be down to 1 probably. What we see our role as a sort of government agency is not to pick winners and losers. We don't know which of these technologies will end up winning, but we do mandate that utilities utilize the most open protocols possible, so that they are not themselves funding and installing the types of charging that some customers can't use. And the same goes for communication protocols.
Did you want to add anything to that, Tyson?
No, I think that's right, and that's absolutely right. And one of the things that CARB had a regulation recently about open access standards, and they requiring credit card readers on each of the charging stations. So if you don't have the RFID card, you can show up and use your credit card. I think that also through the process of that regulatory engagement, a lot of the companies created bilateral agreements. So if you're an EVgo customer, that EVgo card will work at a charge point station or an Electrify America station. And so there's a lot of work within the industry, but also, we have the regulatory thing to go. But I think we're all very much want to make sure, especially in the fast charging environment, it's seamless. You show up. There's also movement on a standard that is plug and charge. So kind of similar to the Tesla experience, but for all the other vehicles where you just plug in and the billing would take care of under the vehicle. There's still a bit of work to do on that one. It's Electrify America is offering it. I think there's 2 cars that have it right now, but so this is evolving rapidly, but I think everybody's focused on making it easy for the end user.
Great. Well, let me ask you both to stay here on camera, because I'm going to open this now to Chair Randolph, and then ask the other commissioners and board members if they'd like to speak after I then call on Director Velasquez. Chair Randolph.
Thank you. Those were all really good presentations. I guess one question, it's really not a question for one of the panelists, but we've had conversations about the importance, opportunities for coordinating with the federal government. And I'm wondering if one of those opportunities might be an opportunity to take care of the tax implications, right? Like, can we have rules about whether or not these types of incentives would require a 1099? So that might be something that we think about exploring. But that was all I had for now. I'm not sure if any of my other board members would like to speak up. I mean, the other thing I would note briefly is that on the issue of resilience, and sort of, I'm really pleased to see the PSPS standards looking at things like making charging available. But I think it's also important to note that, gas stations go down when the electricity goes down as well. So I think it's really important that those of us who live in California sort of need to remember that as those of you in LA the last few days know, earthquakes can happen anytime. And so we need to be thinking about always being prepared for emergency situations. I think that's really important.
That's great. Thank you very much, Chair Randolph. I'm going to call on Director Velasquez next, then Board Member Sperling, then Commissioner Guardino.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Likewise, I think the presentations were terrific. I very much appreciate Ms. McComber's presentation. We talked a lot about the implications of cost. People get overwhelmed when every time I'm in a low-income community, they're overwhelmed about the notion of the economy transition to clean vehicles. There's the perception that this is, way out of reach. And I think the opportunity to share with these communities, that there are possibilities, there are incentives, really understanding that in a linguistically and culturally competent manner is going to be so important in the years to come. And so I really appreciate that this organization is already having an extensive network of partners in the communities that can amplify this message. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Board Member Sperling? You're muted. We need to unmute you.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
There I go. Okay, so it was a great set of presentations, all different aspects of the challenges. So I have one overarching comment I want to make that's relevant to all of these, and then I have a few short questions. So the overarching comment is that the research in the last few years is overwhelming and unanimous in saying that the introduction of electric vehicles is going to lead to economic savings to the economy, that it'll take a few years. The analyses that are being done say that in 5 to 10 years, the total cost of ownership for an electric vehicle will be less than a gasoline vehicle, and also for trucks as well. So this is both cars and most of the trucks. And so when we talk about electrification here, we should be thinking about this, that this is going to be a really strong benefit to the economy. Never mind the climate benefits, the health benefits, that's all, gravy, icing on top of the cake. And so as we think about putting in chargers in housing, for instance, it's, given that these rules take a number of years anyway, it seems like we could be even possibly doing it even faster than what we were hearing that HCD is requiring, given that it now looks like, when we have regulations, the industry looks at regulations and they say, okay, maybe they won't really happen, or they'll be slower. But this is a case where it's becoming clear that electrification is so compelling. So it's not only important for decarbonization, but it's going to increasingly be important. What's that? So it's increasingly important also just for the economy as well. So, I don't know if HCD folks want to comment, but that's one thought. The other is that the vehicle to grid issue, the VGI initiatives, and this would be for Yulia Schmidt. We're starting to put money into school buses, electric school buses. And in some ways, it's the worst application from a cost effectiveness perspective. It's a great one in terms of, the political optics of it, but it becomes a great option if we use it for bidirectional charging, because these buses are unused at peak times in the summertime. And it seems like that's a #1 strategy, both to learn how to do it well as actually to get true large benefits. And I wonder if there's a focus on that and what progress. I know there's some places around the country that are already doing that. Montgomery County and Maryland is one of the pioneers. And the last question is for Taria McComber. And part of it's great what your group is doing, Grid Alternatives, and I'm familiar with some of it. It's really impressive. A question I have, though, is part of what you're involved with are these pilot projects with car sharing, using electric vehicles for car sharing, for ride hailing. And I've had a concern that these programs are not sustainable. And in other words, there's funding for a short period of time, and then that funding disappears. Are they going to just disappear? What is the thinking that you might have from your perspective about making these projects not only more sustainable, but scalable? Thank you.
Well, you asked a lot of questions in there. Ms. McComber, I hope you can come back on screen to answer some of them, but did any of you want to talk about the vision about electrification and the economic boost that that would make?
Okay. This big agreement there. I think right? It's a huge opportunity, you know, based cost savings, but also if you look at California and their manufacturing footprint, and then throw in Lithium Valley as an example. I mean, there's a lot of really unique opportunities that California has, and a leg up with great university systems like UC Davis.
Thank you so much. Ms. McComber, do you want to talk a little bit about the resiliency of these plans and grant opportunities? That was a very good question.
Yes, it's a great question, and I'm glad you surfaced it. It's definitely a question that I don't know if I can fully answer, but that is something that we hear from outreach partners, even with our project, is Access Clean California going to continue after 2021? And so it's something that our communities are really focused on, is like, if you're going to bring this program into our program, especially, not that not all programs are, all communities are speaking about it, but we do definitely hear it a lot from our Native communities and our sovereign nations, is like, can we make sure that if you do create a program, that it's something that is going to last for more than a year or even 3 years. So it's something that's being surfaced. It's something that is, I am a grantee of CARB, so it's something that I can't necessarily answer. But I believe some of my staff leads and my managers are on the line. So I'm sure they can reach out to answer that question. I will say that scalability is an incredible word, because I think when we think scalability, we think large and big. And from our project's perspective, I actually have a sticky right here that says, how do we integrate organizing and movement building into the project? And when I think of scalability, I think of scaling and building out our outreach network to be a subsidiary of like mini outreach networks that are all working and coordinated together. So instead of thinking of scalability as like this one centralized place, I think of scalability through the thought of everything being distributed. So many people doing a lot of things that are coordinated and reflective of the communities that they're serving. We're a state of so many people. Over 50 languages, I think, are spoken in this state, over 40 million people. There's just no way for us to do this from one place. So how do we support and build capacity within all of these community-based and trusted community pillars to do that work? Not do it for us, but do it in a way that is going to be the most effective and efficient. Sorry, I didn't answer specifically your question.
No, that was wonderful, actually. Thank you so much. I'm going to call on Commissioner Guardino, then Board Member Pacheco-Werner, then Board Member Hurt, and we have, I am aware that we have 7 public comments, 3 written comments. So we'll get to others of them in future. Commissioner Guardino.
Thank you, Chair Norton and President Randolph. This has been so educational and inspiring already this morning. So I want to thank all of our panelists and our staff for putting together such a timely and compelling conversation. Let me start with full transparency. I always feel this is important because we're talking about electric vehicles and electric vehicle infrastructure and the resiliency of our energy sources and the grid. So transparency, 3 data points. I was on the original board of directors of ChargePoint, and until last month served as a special advisor to the CEO of Proterra, the all-electric bus company that's now, as you just heard from Dan Sperling, is moving into the space of all-electric school buses as well. And my day job is Executive Vice President at Bloom Energy, and we're a key leader in microgrids to strengthen clean energy resilience. So those 3 items to be transparent as we move forward. But first, President Randolph's comments about vehicles and infrastructure and end users really resonated. And I want to thank her for taking on this incredibly critical role as the new leader at CARB. Thanks for your service, Leanne. And as we look into this, some specific just questions I wanted to ask all four of the presenters, Tyson, Kyle, Yulia, Taria, excellent information, deeply appreciated. I want to, if Yulia can take herself off of mute, I'd love to follow up with you on the side so I don't take too much time this morning, but your comments around grid resilience for EVs, I would love to go much deeper on how we accomplish that in California. Kudos to the Commission for its ongoing efforts to prepare our state and all of our communities around the upcoming wildfire season, which everything that we know and read continues to emphasize that wildfires are only growing in terms of their intensity, their duration, and its impact on all of us through the direct damage of wildfires, as well as the direct impact of PS events and rolling blackouts. So if you want to build on that at all real time, would love to hear it in a moment, or to have a sidebar conversation with you and your colleagues at the Commission. And Taria, thank you for your emphasis on a holistic approach. I don't see your picture still on the screen, so I hope you're still there. But oh, there you are. Great, wonderful. I love your holistic approach and your emphasis on clean air. I bet many of us on this call read with great concern the study by Harvard that came out just 4 or 5 weeks ago, that 1 of every 5 deaths on the planet is now directly attributed to air quality. 1 of every 5 deaths. And we know in California that it is disproportionately falling on our most underserved communities. And we need solutions on air quality, as CARB has always emphasized and led the way on, that make sure that our underserved communities are listened to and addressed in terms of meeting the air quality needs in terms of localized air pollutants. Again, if you have more to add, I'd love to hear it now, or to neighbor with you off of line with you and your team. But I would like to make a suggestion, and I never make a suggestion without offering to be a part of the solution. So the suggestion, your holistic approach of already engaging in such a wonderful way a network that includes our climate justice communities, our CBOs, our Native American communities, and our labor community is fantastic. If I can be of help, and if you would find value to adding a 5th leg to that table of our employer communities, the innovation economy companies often founded and driven right here in California to be a part of those conversations as well, whether that's EV producers or EV charging station producers, or any part of that food chain that makes this possible. Taria, you have me at hello. Just let me know if I can help in that way.
That's wonderful. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. And Board Member Pacheco Werner.
Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation. Thank you to all the agencies involved and those not present whose action plans will provide important pieces of the puzzle to this. 2 questions. The first one is for the housing team. For the impact on housing, I wanted to see if there are any studies or plans to study the impact of the 2019 requirements on the cost of housing. How has it been impacted? I think this is a unique opportunity to really begin studying the aspects of zero emission vehicles that present the most challenges to housing costs, or to even see if there are myths that need to be dispelled? My second question is for anyone on the panel, but maybe GoBiz. I've really been interested in how this infrastructure can really also be an influx in jobs, particularly as we think about how we're transitioning industries. Is there a jobs training component to this strategy? How can we make sure there's an equity lens in terms of the jobs that will be created as a result of this transition, both to make sure that those in disadvantaged communities are not just consumers, but makers and installers and maintenance workers? I guess the second part to this question is also, how do we integrate our education system so that young people, particularly in those communities that have been traditionally left behind, can have some level of training to be able to attain these jobs and really have be prepared again to think about this next level of how our economy works, and how do we make sure, if we're really committed to equity, how do we make sure we don't leave those communities further behind on the actual, income drawing aspect to this? Thank you.
Yeah, this is Kyle Kraus from HCD. Regarding the question, Member Pacheco, on the cost impacts of the 2019 code requirements, which were EV capable, as we know. So single family homes to have the ability to install EV chargers in their parking, either in garage or parking area. And then also the capability in multifamily at 10% of the parking spaces. We know that working with building industry, that there was a cost increase associated with providing that capability for conduits, raceways, panel capacity, not nearly as significant as the proposal that we've submitted to provide actual EV charging access. So we've always worked with building industry side by side and submitted the requisite economic and fiscal impact associated with any code change proposal. And we monitor and rely on feedback from building industry to support these proposals. I'm not aware of any look back at how the 2019 Cal Green Code requirements actually impacted versus our estimated fiscal impact. So we're happy to coordinate with building industry and building owners to try to solicit some information and data on the actual cost impacts.
Thank you so much. Did you also want to talk about the job component? Was that something, Tyson, you were going to talk about? That was a good question from board member Pacheco Werner.
No, I think that's a great question, and it's one of the the pillars of the strategy is workforce. And so the lead agencies there are the California Workforce Development Board, coupled with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. And this summer in July, they have a just transition roadmap that will be coming out, and it's really about how do we transition our economy away from fossil fuels to zero emissions in a in a just way with the angle of workforce. One of the things we're being careful not to do is promise a one-for-one replacement. It's it's how do you make sure that people have a good place to land wherever it is and whatever industry that ends up being. And so I think there's a lot of great work there, a lot of partnerships with the community colleges and stuff. But there's also kind of things that we don't, in going through the agency action plan process, and I think it'll improve each year. But there's other agencies that are stepping up, like the Bureau of Automotive Repair, trying to make sure that technicians have access to ZEV related training, and making sure that they're going the extra mile to bring in priority communities. The other one that jumped out that was interesting is the Contractor State License Board. They have a database of all like the C10 contractors, for example, electrical contractors throughout the state. We think we can get to a place where you can start to figure out, are these jobs going to the contractors who are based in priority communities? We still have to work that out, but I think a couple of years ago, I got to do a tour in a key community we're trying to influence. And one of the things that really jumped out at me is like, if you're not hiring workers from this community to do the work in the community, you're not looking hard enough, right? And so I think that's really a challenge that we have to keep working on and making sure that the systems work. I mean, all of us have that intention. It's just to make sure the systems work. And so that's also looking at state contracting and making sure, like, even if they, you know, whatever the component of that job is, that we're creating those opportunities. And then finally, just that, you know, we want to make sure that we are measuring ourselves against it. And so that's kind of like the Contractor State License Board and stuff. And so as we're developing out that ZEV Strategy website and web portal, you know, we're working on workforce metrics and equity metrics, and it's a little bit challenging, especially in the equity lens, because a lot of it, I mean, you can measure cars, or you can measure things, but it's like we're really trying to measure an improvement in life, and that's hard to put into a number sometimes, right? But so we're working on that, but I think it's absolutely a focus area and something we want to make sure that we're doing and going the extra mile to make sure that the investments and the job creation happens in the communities we want to influence the most in a positive way.
Great. That's wonderful. Let's move to CARB board member Davina Hurt.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, speakers. This has been really informative presentation, and I want to uplift Ms. McComer's start to her presentation. Very powerful and necessary. You hear my cuckoo clock back here? Bad timing, sorry. At any rate, so I have actually two questions, and I'm going to center them around a little bit first around charging standards, and in particular, the concern about charging standards and kind of the confusing structure of incentives and tax implications that are kind of reoccurring themes from some folks that we've heard from, in particular, drayage trucker community. Are there plans for building standards for trucks at warehouses and stores, and will the lessons from this Access Clean California help inform truck incentives, such as through CARB's Project 800 initiative and the HVIP efforts? So that's one of my questions. And then my other is, there's been a lot of talk about universal basic income for some of the communities that are really struggling. And when we talk more about a future with the changing economy, there are also people curious, what's the likelihood, and are there any discussions around a universal basic ZEV strategy, kind of in that same vein, to really uplift and help communities that changing to all electric or changing to a ZEV option is just not first and foremost on their mind. It's not a priority. So instead of circling just around incentives, which are very important and they're essential, but still not enough for folks and many families, are we thinking about a different way to do this? Meaning, maybe not incentive, but passing on something universal and handing an electric car. Like Oprah said, you get a car, you get a car, you get a car. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McComber?
We're still a pilot program, so we haven't been able to start the conversations around heavy duty yet. So thank you for the reminder, but also, you know, many of the folks that are you know, driving trucks, if we're just centering around on that aspect of it, could leverage the programs, the light duty programs for their families, and also recognizing some of the questions that come up for me as I think about the transition of heavy duty is just labor comes to mind, and how do we ensure that these high you know, capital costs of investing into electrified heavy duty trucks and other heavy duty vehicles impacts folks' income. So that's a question that just comes to mind as I think about that. But if we are extended into a full program, I think we can definitely start to think about how we can leverage the outreach network that we have, build it out to include the ability to do education and awareness for organizations and companies and for heavy duty vehicles as well. I take an agile approach to the project where we try to stay as responsive as possible and as nimble as possible for our community, because things obviously can change so quickly in our world. I mentioned in my presentation that I think about all of my work as how do we build a climate resiliency package for community members. So we're starting with vehicles, charging, and solar, giving the opportunity for folks to charge their vehicle with the sun. And at Grid, we're always thinking about, and we know that, as I mentioned, communities can't just think about these things. They need to think about everything. So I love the idea of a universal basic ZEV strategy. I think that's incredible. I wrote it down as yes. We do need to take that approach. We take that approach as we built this entire project. We've taken a human-centered approach, but we've also taken a universal approach. So if we know that we have built a process that folks that have the greatest barriers to accessing these programs, they can access them, then we know folks, even like Erica can access them. And even if you're over income qualified and you go to the benefits finder and you put in that you are a household of two that makes over $150,000, there's still programs that are going to come up. CVRP is going to come up, and then an asterisk that says definitely check out the federal tax rebate are going to come up. So we're really wanting to make sure that it's a large tent that everyone can take advantage of and come and see what they'll have fun at the fair. But when we get down to the nitty gritty, we want to make sure that we're coordinating these programs enough where it is becoming a climate resiliency package. We're able to leverage the future of vehicle to grid and grid to vehicle. If things shut down, especially our Native communities, are they able to leverage their vehicle as a battery? Are they able to, still have some electricity or some transportation if their vehicle is charged? So we're thinking about how do we continue to add things to this package: energy efficiency, electric stoves, electric water heaters. How do we make sure the transition to all of these technologies and incentives is one that it's not so piecemeal, that it's taking the communities that have the greatest impacts from climate change right now and have had the greatest impacts of bad air for generations due to redlining are not just in line, but they're the first in line. They're the very first to be able to take advantage of all these technologies to clean the air. And last point is, we did a lot of marketing research as we start to build this benefits finder specifically. And we actually found specifically the Black community did not really relate to messaging that was just around saving money. They understood that this is an environmental question. This is an environmental, we are trying to reduce carbon in the air. They actually wanted to hear more about the environmental impacts of their decisions. We feel a special connection to the fact that we can and we have a responsibility to clean our air as well. So when talking about this transition, we don't need to just talk about the savings and how we can reduce the financial impacts, but our communities are recognizing that this climate change battle, our approach to addressing climate change, we all have a stake in it, and they want to have a stake in it if given the ability to.
That's fantastic. We have a number of people waiting in the queue, so I'm so glad you're here to answer these questions. I'd like to call on next CARB board member Diane Takvorian.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me add my appreciation to all the presenters. I think it's really exciting to experience the integration of all of our state agencies, our critical state agencies, and as well as the community and equity, climate, and environmental justice approach that was represented by Terea. There's a lot to comment on, but I just wanted to first underscore Commissioner Guardino's reference to the recent Harvard study related to deaths attributed to air quality, and also remind us of the 2020 Harvard study that showed that residents of communities with significant air pollution are really much more susceptible to COVID infection and death. And we saw that prediction borne out in disadvantaged communities. So the work is very important, and it's very important to do as soon as possible to reinforce Member Sperling's statement to move more quickly. So my questions are focused around that. First, I really wanted to focus on, and I understand the limited ability of HCD to do this, but I think that ZEV charging infrastructure in existing multifamily affordable housing is really critically important. And I wonder if we couldn't get a comment about how it's being integrated with the SOMA program. I know GRID is involved in both, but I also know that SOMA is very challenging for affordable housing projects to access, that the waiting list is long and difficult. So I wanted to hear more about that. Also wanted to hear if anyone's thinking about ZEV charging infrastructure in communities where housing can't support it. We have public spaces where ZEV charging could occur for folks where housing is too old or it just wouldn't work for that charging infrastructure to be located actually in the residence or in the multifamily housing. And my third question is, how do we expedite heavy duty charging to reduce the barriers to ZEV transition for ports and distribution centers? Many of these are in disadvantaged communities that are creating significant air pollution, and the lack of charging infrastructure is really being put forward as a barrier for these areas, these centers to move forward. So those are my three questions. Thank you.
Tyson, can we have you talk about the expediting the charging infrastructure, especially for freight in communities of need?
Yeah, so we're doing a lot of work on, well, permit streamlining, and then also working closely. We have more work to do on the interconnection process. I think that's a lot on the utility side. But the permit streamlining, we have this, we're calling the ZEV Permitting Olympics to get everybody streamlined around, the permitting practices. And that's both for EV charging and hydrogen fueling stations. And I think there's some really interesting work happening too in terms of outside of the home charging. Just saw a presentation, it's not public yet, but one of the CCAs, the community choice aggregators in Alameda County, is doing a bunch of analysis about where they would place DC fast chargers, for example, to help accelerate adoption in their multifamily complexes. And if you start to layer on, a lot of the Uber and Lyft or the TNC drivers live in those multifamily houses. If they're finding the places where they can walk shortly to get the fast charging access, and working closely with the Energy Commission on that. And so there's the fast charging option. We also have 45 hydrogen stations open and a pathway to about 200. And that's going to start opening some doors, especially as the next generation of fuel cell cars come in. And so I think there's definitely a lot to do. I think that existing housing stock is a tremendously huge issue. And I think that hard part is, if you have access to charging at home, it's often cheaper. DC fast charging could be more expensive. And so we have to figure out a way to balance that out as well, through a variety of programs. Like even, like looking at Clean Cars for All, for example, could potentially come with a charging card, so it's one of the ideas that we're tossing around to enable charging, or talk about panel upgrades, or there's a lot to be done to help make this easy for the end user.
Are there any other thank you, Tyson. Are there any other input to the questions that were just raised?
Yeah, I just did want to jump in because I think that's a really relevant equity question for us that we've been thinking about a lot, which is that not everyone can charge at home. Fundamentally, 50% of Californians, give or take, are renters, for example, and it's very hard for them to install a charger in a house they don't own. Some percentage, I forget, maybe 30 or 40% are dwellers in multifamily buildings, which do face obstacles to installing charging, although they're now starting to catch up. And so public charging is crucial. Public could include, for example, workplace charging, which we have had some success with, but of course that requires a very particular kind of workplace and a particular work schedule where someone parks for quite a long time. And so this is kind of the double-sided equity issue that Tyson pointed out. One is you need public charging infrastructure, and that's why we have utilities investing most heavily on that end of light-duty charging rather than within single-family homes. And secondly, it is quite expensive, more expensive right now to charge in stations like that because they pay a very different type of rate, and that fast charge is a much higher voltage draw on the grid, and so it really brings a lot more cost to the grid than that low voltage overnight charge that folks do at home. So these are things we really struggle with, and we think some of that can be answered with good rate design, but we don't have all the answers yet, that's for sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have a lot of people who want to still weigh in, so I appreciate all of you here. We're gonna go to public comment after we hear from Commissioners Davis and Liu. Commissioner Davis.
Good morning, everybody, and echo the comments of everybody else that's asked some questions so far. These were fantastic presentations, really very useful. I believe everybody that's part of the decision-making process would move forward. My chairman, my chairwoman, Chairman Norton, had made it clear to be brief if somebody said the things that needed to be said. So I will just echo all of Brother Bobby Alvarado's comments. And this, we all believe we need to do something about urban infill. We also need to figure out how to bring jobs to where people live, because I'm not sure you're ever going to get us out of our cars in California. And Terry, the Access Clean, your presentation was absolutely that, a breath of fresh air, because and my fellow commissioners on the CTC know that one of my biggest concerns is as we're making this transition from fossil fuel to electric vehicles, that somehow the people in the construction industry that I represent, 65,000 members in California, who are predominantly people of color, and who are living in communities that are already disadvantaged and often forgotten, don't become further victimized by vehicle mile travel and what those fees are while we're figuring out, what the new deal is, right? And so, Trey, I'll try to reach out to you also to have a conversation about how we might be able to connect organizationally, and maybe even see if I can try to figure out a way to get you connected with the state building trades. It's our parent organization. It's our umbrella for all of us. We're like every family. We don't always get along with everybody in the umbrella, but it is our umbrella. So I'll try to do something there. So sort of two questions. One for Tyson. You referenced the C10 license earlier. There's a C46 license for solar work. Has there been any thought to creating a new license classification for the installation of these charging apparatuses, I'll say, because they're, different forms, different places, installed in different spots, that might also make it a little bit easier for somebody, a little entrepreneurial, to figure a way to get a contractor's license and go from being an installer to an owner to, to becoming an employer. And then second question, and then I'll put myself on mute, was back to Director Velasquez, and I'll clarify as Commissioner Gardino did. I serve as the president of the International Accreditation Service Board, which is a subsidiary of the International Code Council. But the question for Director Velasquez is first off, I'm happy to see we're trying to figure out how we control costs as we look at putting these on houses, multi-units, and wherever we need to put the charging stations to control those costs. But is HCD also looking at other ways where you can then reduce other costs? The example being, the Uniform Plumbing Code versus the International Plumbing Code, and how that makes things easier so there's other areas where there may be alternate means or alternate codes that still produce a safe, well-built product that would help reduce those costs, not only controlling the cost of the charging station installation, but then other costs down the line that affect the overall cost of a project. So that's just looking for those comments. And once again, fantastic presentations. And I would ask, I don't know who from the CTC, whatever the appropriate means would be to get my information. I would authorize that to be done if you guys could do that for me. So thank you, and I appreciate everybody's time today.
Thank you. So Tyson, do you want to talk about the licensing part? And then Toria, I know there was a lot of praise for you, and if you want to add something about the real world examples of how applicable and what the jobs opportunities have been that you found in the installation portion of this, that would be great.
Great. Well, yes, quickly on the licensing, I'm not aware of a push for another license. I think the thing that has happened is training. The EVITP program, Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Training Program, was put in legislation last year, AB 841. So the state investments, are required to have that. At least the contractor has to have an EVITP certified electrician on staff to do certain work. And it gets a little confusing and stuff. So I think that might be the closest thing. The training is, it's public and accessible. There's a cost associated with it, but that's one way that, contractors could get a leg up in the market. But I'm not aware of any other movement to do additional contracting thing, but there could be.
Thank you.
Toria?
I'll add quickly, I'm overarching, so I am not as close to the work that we do, which is supporting the statewide financial assistance program, Clean Vehicle Assistance Program, and installing charging and coordinating installing charging for applicants, as well as coordinating them getting a charge card. So we have a statewide program that's already giving public charging cards. So folks that aren't owning their home or have a place to charge at home can still charge. 2 points there is, one, definitely still, I've heard the barrier of it being kind of difficult to get a certified electrician to do all of this training. So I know I hope that we've hired our certified electrician to do specifically charging infrastructure installs because it's important, and we want to train more folks to do it. We do also workforce development at Grid, so it's definitely important to continue to. I think that the sub part of that thought is as we create programs for charging to be installed, to ask the community where they want that charging. Not everyone feels comfortable charging at certain parks or at sometimes Whole Foods or places that may seem like a really accessible place, but sometimes EV Noir has been a part of our outreach network and has shared examples of people having their charger taken out of their car and put into another vehicle, having the police called on them, a Black man having the police called on them at a public charging station. So just recognizing that we might need to ask communities, we should involve communities and where they want that charging. And then the second piece of that is, as we create programs for charging to be built, not forgetting the smaller mom and pop shops that can do installs in their community that look like their community and are trusted in their community. So making sure that the program design doesn't lean towards really large installers, because that's also, that's also kind of a workforce opportunity, is to really get these smaller shops to be able to do these installs in their communities. So going back to my thought around distributed work is really leveraging some of these smaller mom and pop places to be part of this just transition as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We now have some questions from Commissioner Joe Liu.
Thank you, Chair Norton. That comment just gave me a flashback to being in Riverside one time charging an electric vehicle and seeing some teenage kid just walk up to my car and pull out the charger and drop it and walk away. And I just looked at him like, what are you doing? Anyway, it has happened. My first comment, I think, is kind of more of a general comment about the idea of transitioning to electric vehicles by 2035, or to the extent that we can. And the fact that we really do recognize that, you know, bumper to bumper electric vehicles aren't the solution either, right? So we have to make sure everything works. And that brought me to thinking about one of the things that came up at our last commission meeting, which was the backlog of ships and containers and trucks and locomotives throughout our goods movement system here in Southern California, and the problems that we're dealing with. And we assigned our executive director, Mitch Weiss, to basically fix the problem. So he's going to be doing some work on this. And I think one of the things that would be very, very helpful from the Air Resources Board would be to put this into some perspective in terms of what the emissions impact has been from this backlog. In fact, this system of systems isn't working here. And to give us an idea of what the benefits will be when we get to zero emissions, but also the public health impacts, because like board member Takvorian mentioned, I mean, these impacts are happening in predominantly low-income communities of color. And I'm very, very concerned about that. So if I would like to request the Air Resources Board's help in providing some estimate, it doesn't have to be perfect, but some estimate of what the emissions impact has been from the backlog of the freight system, and what the public health impacts we could expect, back of the envelope kind of calculations from those added emissions, to give us that sense of urgency and perhaps help our director with his report back to us in terms of context. The second thing I wanted to mention also came up at our last meeting, a commission meeting, and that had to do with the AB 1236 EV charging permit streamlining. And Tyson, I mean, this is something that's in your ballpark. I mean, I know that you're using this carrot approach of Olympics, of recognizing those cities and counties that are streamlining their permits. But this was a legal requirement, and the deadline is long past. And there's a lot of cities out there that just aren't complying. And I would really like to know, I mean, is there a stick a little bit that you can use to move them along so that we get that EV charging streamlining in all those cities and counties, so we don't have to have unreasonable delays once people decide to move forward with that. Thank you.
Are these comments, or would you like some people to respond to your questions?
Well, I'm hoping that ARB would embrace my request and send the data right over. If they're willing to commit to that, I'd be very happy. And Tyson, if you have any ideas on how to make this EV permitting streamlining process work any better, I would love to hear that.
Chair Randolph, we'll start with you.
I'll talk to staff about that. That sounds like some really useful data that would be helpful.
Okay, and thank you so much, Chair Randolph. And Tyson?
Yeah, I think it is a problem. We have 540 jurisdictions in the state. 130 of them are streamlined, so we still have a long way to go, and the deadline has passed. That's been really effective in some ways, but it had no teeth, and so we're kind of begging, borrowing, and stealing everything we can to make it happen. One of the tools that was successful that we find ways to use more is the Energy Commission's Cal EVIP incentive program, which was county specific, and so all else being equal, the choice would be to go to a county that's more streamlined. And so that really motivated some action for the ones who were on the list for the Energy Commission. But other than that, it's just kind of slow and steady outreach. And the Permanent Olympics, we're going to keep it going. We have 4 counties that have streamlined 100%. I mean, LA that's a really hard one. But then Alpine County was really excited. They were our first gold medal, but they're just a county. There's no cities in it, So I think there's more to be done there. There is no stick, but with carrots, we're making slow and steady progress. And just the economic argument of more investment, accelerating the adoption. I memean, I think people seem to get it. Part of the challenge has been, well, frankly, COVID, and then also just lack of staffing resources at the local jurisdictions where they, they have 10 top priorities, and we're trying to make this go to the top of the pile.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. We want to call on next. Excuse me. We want to call on next.
Madam Chair, this is Gustavo. I just wanted to, I know you're going to move to hearing from the public, but there were just a few comments and questions on building costs that I just wanted briefly to touch on. Is that something I can do now?
And then I did want CARB board member Balms to know that he's in the queue.
Okay.
Please proceed, Director Velasquez.
Okay. So no, I'm in and off the meeting. It's a long meeting, but trying my best to stay engaged. And I heard some questions, comments about sort of the pace of the changes, especially as we go into additional changes in our multifamily dwelling standards, and then really the relationship between that and cost. And just for context, I just wanted to say that I don't think it's anything new to all of you to say that we have a tremendous problem of supply of housing in our state. When you look at the last 8 to 10 years, this state has permitting half of what it should have been producing, and of that half, the least amount being produced is housing that can accommodate low and very low income people. That the issues that we confront as a state around homelessness, can really tie very well to an issue of lack of supply to very low income people, and we can't buy ourselves out of this problem. I mean, there will be never the amount of subsidy that public subsidy that we could put into creating what the need is. And so we hear all the time, from industry, an issue of cost being, the number one issue. So we continue to explore. There are a lot of innovations in the field, whether it's through materials, whether it's through standards. I heard someone comment before about the types of standards that we use, how we could modify that. That's always going to be, negotiations with industry. We are, as HCD, required to follow certain standards, not others. But that's just part of the puzzle, right? It's also, materials, innovations in construction. I just want to say, we are looking at all the different possibilities to try to reduce costs, including working closely with local jurisdictions. Again, nothing new for you to remind you that there are so many unnecessary barriers sometimes that local jurisdictions impose that delay construction, that impose so much cost before even you get to break ground on building a unit. And so it's an all of the above approach that we're taking in order to reduce costs. And if we do so, then we can obviously do augmentations that can meet climate goals much quicker than how we are doing it now. But I just wanted you to know that we are mindful of that all of the approaches matter and they are all on the table.
Director Velasquez, you raise a really important point that I hope you will say again when we are talking about the CAPTI process in this afternoon, because this whole way of how we move to zero emissions and housing production together, and we look at cost impacts and production impacts, this is exactly, to me, where we need to be putting it all together in the CAPTI plan. So this is very important, and I hope we get a chance to revisit it this afternoon. You're raising some really important issues for us all to address. With that, I'd like to go to Director Balms and then move to public comment.
Thank you, Chair Norton. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
I apologize for not being able to get my webcam to work on the go-to platform. I suspect it's UCSF security issues, because I have to deal with patients and patient information. I want to say first that I tremendously appreciate the presentations and the dialogue that I've heard after the presentations. I've been to a number of these joint meetings, and to me, this is the best one so far in terms of really talking with each other. Yeah, thank you, Carl. I agree with a thumbs up. And then I also want to highlight, I think, an excellent suggestion of Joe Liu, I should say Commissioner Liu, with regard to trying to quantify the health impacts of the surface goods movement backup. And it's not just in Southern California. There are a number of cargo of container ships sitting in the San Francisco Bay for the same, systemic problems that you outlined in Southern California. And I think, Chair Randolph, that it wouldn't be that hard for our staff to do a sort of quick and dirty estimate of those health impacts. We could actually probably do a very careful one without too much effort. So I support that. And then the actual comment that or the question that I wanted to ask was about, well, I said the context is actually somewhat following Board Member Hertz's, I think, very interesting suggestion about a zero emission car for all. But I think even very low income folks would have trouble unless we gave a free car, even with the subsidies that are provided and that Ms. McComber is trying so hard to get to the people that need it. I still think zero emission vehicles are out of reach for very low income folks. And I just want to have electric bikes in the conversation. I haven't heard it today. Maybe I missed it. And maybe it'll come up later this afternoon. But I think that electric bikes are a way to go forward. And it would be another way of not having bumper to bumper zero emission cars. So I just want to make sure that we consider e-bikes as we move forward.
Yes. Thank you so much. These are very important comments. I'd like to move to Justin and the public comment, and then I have some closing questions and comments for us. Justin?
Thank you, Chair Norton. I will begin by reading the written comments. We have 5 at this time. The first comes from Steve Bertelbo. This came in during the Kyle Kraus presentation. Steve writes, if we want everyone to drive EVs, why don't we require every new parking space to recharge such vehicles? Thank you.
Does anyone want to take that? We'll make a note of that and follow up on this question. Next public comment.
The next written comment came in from Nancy Ramirez. This came in during the Emily Withers presentation. She writes, will this plan provide for more electric filling stations for electric cars? Thank you.
Tyson, you want to take that? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I think the building standards will, 100%, that's also just for the previous question, is a great target to get to. Some communities are going there. It's just a matter, you might not even need 100%. It's kind of, if you get faster level 2 charging, maybe it's 50% of the spaces actually might make more sense. So it's a balance of, cost versus, it's a cost benefit analysis, but the idea is to enable 100% electrification, plug-in and hydrogen.
Thank you. Next comment, Justin.
The next comment came in from Ben Wong. This also came in during the Emily Withers presentation. He writes, are there any grants, programs, or incentives to retrofit existing residential dwellings for EV charging? Thank you.
Ms. McComber, do you want to take that one?
So from Access Clean California's point of view, what we're trying to do on the back end, kind of insulate the public from this part of things, is hopefully we can coordinate these programs enough. For example, if we can coordinate, once Empower EV comes online, for example, can we coordinate someone that might be leveraging Energy for All, so solar on their home, getting scrapping and replacing a car, Clean Cars for All, and being in P&G and E territory to be able to upgrade their main service panel and be able to get level 2 charging at home. So this is where that coordination on the back end, insulating the public from that piece. But if we can like talk to each other and see like, can we leverage this person taking advantage of all these programs to make sure their home is able to sustain not just charging, but also solar as well. That's an amazing opportunity for some folks that own their home. So that's one example that we're trying to work on, and we try to stay closely coordinated to be able to do that without the public having to know it. So if we know from our case management's point of view that this person is eligible for all these programs, we know these programs well enough to be able to, jigsaw the pieces of programs together to get them the technologies they need.
Thank you. That's a wonderful answer, and we look forward to following up with you on that. And even with the energy companies as well, it sounds like they play a big role in this. Justin, next 2 inputs from the public.
Thank you, Chair. The next written comment comes from Elizabeth Hahn. She writes, what does Tyson Eckerly see as the MPO and local agency role for advancing EO N7920? Does the state promote MPO local agency investment in charging stations with public funding, or does the state anticipate that the private sector or state agencies will deploy EV charging stations? Thank you.
That's great. So the local governments and MPOs have an absolutely pivotal role to play, from permitting to planning to making sure we're getting these stations in the right spots. If there's investment dollars you can leverage, we want to make sure we get those into the system as much, we're trying to, everything, we're animating public capital, private capital. Also, if there are things that we can be doing at the state that make, MPO and local government jobs easier, we want to know about that. It's, very much a collaboration going forward.
Thank you very much. Justin, next public comment.
Next written comment comes from Lupe Camacho. This question is for Terea McComber. She writes, why is there no Clean Cars for All program for Inland Empire? We have a tremendous amount of commuters due predominantly to more affordable housing in the rural areas with employment in Orange, LA, and San Diego counties. How can we, Inland Empire, begin steps towards establishing a program of Clean Cars for All out here? Thank you.
Ms. McComber?
Yeah, that's a great point. Also, and that's a great piece of feedback that we've already received is we have kind of gaps in the scrap and replace portion, which is one of the most effective ways for us to reach our goals is like take this car off the road and replace it with an electric vehicle. My staff leads are on the line, so let's jot this one down. I think I know that Clean Cars for All, Replace Your Ride, and South Coast Air Quality Management District, Replace Your Ride. I don't think it extends all the way into the Inland Empire. I think it's San Bernardino County is where it might stop. So maybe some parts of Inland Empire are in a South Coast jurisdiction, but in the meantime, our outreach partners are still pushing to layer programs together. So Clean Vehicle Assistance Program statewide, no zip code needed, just income qualification, and CVRP's rebate now is, I believe for the next 6 months is going to be in the Central Valley. I don't know if that includes Inland Empire, but that's another program that our outreach partners are hoping to stack together to bring access immediately. So we are taking that feedback, and I hope to see, maybe there's a statewide program that kind of takes all the lessons learned and best practices from the regional Clean Cars for All. And it won't be immediate, but in the future, we do have a scrap and replace program that is similar to Clean Vehicle Assistance Program, and it's statewide. And we can continue to see that very faster transition to clean mobility for our communities. So,
thank you. I'm going to give a bit of some wrap-up comments and a couple questions, and I know right after this we're going to go right into lunch. So first, I wanted to ask
Madam Chair, we have
Yes.
one hand raised.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't see it. Let's call on that hand raise.
Thank you, Chair Norton. We have Will Barrett. Will, you are free to unmute yourself and make your comment.
Thank you very much. This is Will Barrett with the American Lung Association. I'll try to be brief knowing that the lunch is upon us. Really just wanted to say that really appreciated the cross-agency discussion today. Really think the collaborative approach to meeting the EV order, components of the executive order, centering those in equity and access to the benefits of transportation electrification, that's all critical to protecting against the harmful transportation pollution that impacts so many communities across California. We know the transportation sector is the leading source of harmful air and climate pollution and adds just a wide range of public health challenges, including 7,500 deaths per year annually in California. The basic idea that I wanted to convey is that we want to see the incorporation across the board of equity in this transition to zero emission transportation. We want to make sure that all of our state agencies are continuing to work together. Again, very heartened by the discussion today, and especially with Ms. McComber's presentation. Really, I think that's important to continue that dialogue as a baseline for all of the actions that come forward. With CARB, we're going to continue to work with the staff on ZEV regulations across the board. We know that we can't hit our clean air and climate standards without this widespread transition to zero emission technologies. We also know that as we look at the next item on the cap tie, we want to encourage the CTC to really accelerate the development of guidelines that help to advance EV infrastructure. Those recommendations were in the cap tie. I really feel like those are important to get a jump on that guideline development. Finally, want to say, very much appreciate the focus today on infrastructure, and that the Lung Association is putting a high priority on supporting the governor's budget proposal to really invest heavily as quickly as possible on widespread infrastructure deployment. And then in closing, just wanted to appreciate the comments by Dr. Liu and Dr. Balms about the need for robust health evaluations basically across the board as California moves forward in addressing our climate and clean air challenges. So with that, I'll stop and say thank you again for a great presentation.
Wonderful, thank you. I was just made aware that we have 3 more hands raised, and we have other board members and commissioners who'd like to speak again. So I am going to do as I promised to do, which is I'm going to break for lunch. I would really appreciate Tyson and Taria Metcomber if you could come back. We have lots of questions for you. This has been a great conversation, and I think all of the presenters have really inspired us to have some in-depth questions to ask you, and I would just ask your indulgence if you could come back at 12:15 and continue to work with us, because we do have some great questions for you, and we want to appreciate your wonderful presentations because they've inspired a lot of great thinking. And as you've heard, this has been one of the most collaborative and sort of open dialogue opportunities we've had amongst our agencies, and that's really inspiring, and you've helped make that happen. So we'll see everybody back at 12:15. I appreciate the 3 hands raised, and if we have more, we will come back to them as well. Thanks again.